Hey, I am coming to you from my family room. This is Janine Rosche, and this is Love Wonder Read Wednesday, October 7th. And I have a special treat for you guys today. I'm going to be reading the first chapter of my next novel, Wildflower Road, which comes out in 6 days. So next Tuesday, it will be on store shelves. I also wanted to tell you a little bit about what's coming up. On Monday, October 12th at 8:30, I'm going to be having a launch party, and it's going to be a game night where we play all of our favorite 1990s games. So we're going to be playing Mystery Date and Crack the Case and Girl Talk, MASH, and Pictionary with Christiane Hunter, Bethany Turner, Kara Putman, Rachel Scott McDaniel, and Tony Shiloh. So at 8:30 Eastern, I'm hoping you'll come back to this, to my author page and join us for that. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and start reading. This will take a few minutes. So if you are able to, stick around, and if not, please come back a little bit later. I would love to share with you the first chapter of Wildflower Road. So, and hopefully you guys can hear me. I'm really struggling with the whole microphone headset thing. So if you can't hear me, sorry. You'll have to just imagine what I'm saying. So, okay. Chapter 1. Ryan Ashcroft rolled onto her back, clenched her arms across her stomach, and surrendered her breath into the dreary gray sky. The newspaper had predicted snowfall for the mid-May evening, and the morose clouds hovering above the Gallatin Mountains seemed keen to obey. Soon, if there were any justice under heaven, the grave would swallow her whole. If not, in the morning, the groundskeeper would find her dusted and white, though certainly not pure. A peregrine falcon soared overhead, gliding above the cemetery in a grand figure eight. Funny how gracefully predators moved about, as if God granted them a unique skill the prey lacked. Maybe a bit maddening as well. Either way, Ryan pitied the mouse or songbird who would lose its life so the falcon could live. A cold breeze slithered over the hills. Shivers seized her bad shoulder so tightly she couldn't define where the physical pain ended and the sorrow began. Good, I'm glad Beth said she could hear. Thank you for letting me know. She swallowed down the sob threatening to choke her and gasped, but the thin air didn't satisfy her burning lungs. One tear, then another. They burned on release and quickly cooled as they rolled down her temples and into her hair. If only the tears that now salted the grass and dried leaves instead soaked into his shirt as she lay with him on their bed, her chest constricted. Lord, this simple yet honest prayer had wriggled into her 9 long years ago, building a home in the spot between her spine and her stomach where guilt liked to forage. Lord, give me strength. The breeze weakened and a warmth overtook her. She sat up and brushed wisps of red hair from her tear-soaked eyes and cheeks. With a composed breath, she faced the marble stone. Her fingers traced the grooves, waltzing up and down in lines and curves. Beloved husband. Happy birthday, Tyler. She stood and brushed off her jeans, longing for the comfort of her cabin. Tonight, within its cedar-planked walls, she would lay beneath their wedding portrait and drift between memories, focusing on the good ones, though there were few. This would be her last evening of rest. Tomorrow, the preparations for the upcoming tourist season would shift into high gear, beginning with the arrival of the new cook. Hopefully, this one could fry an egg. With the resort's first guests arriving in 9 days, she wouldn't have much time to train him. Somewhere nearby, a twig snapped, and she spun toward the sound. The only other figure in the field of headstones was the concrete angel in the cemetery's center. The peregrine falcon from before perched atop the angel's halo, watching Ryan. In folklore, falcons were said to be messengers from heaven. Ryan had never believed it, but now accusation seemed to pool in its obsidian eyes. She glanced back at the tombstone. I'm so sorry, Tyler, she said, his name breaking in her throat. Then she hurried toward the parking lot, careful not to step on the grass directly in front of each headstone. After all, these were her neighbors, her customers, her friends, and family. Daisies and a tiny yellow teddy bear leaned against the smallest headstone in the cemetery, little Ella Lawrence. The same water that flowed peacefully past her cabin had ripped away the toddler's life 1 mile downriver from the resort. She shuddered. In high school, Ryan had shared a friend group with Ella's mother, but that was where the similarities ended. Ella's mother had done nothing to deserve her tragedy. Out of sight, an engine roared to life. Ryan stopped cold. Dread filled her stomach and spread through her body. She was a fool to think she was ever truly alone. Not in this town. Ryan wrenched open the door of her old Jeep, and before she climbed inside, the flapping of wings rushed over her. The falcon narrowly missed her head before ascending toward the clouds. Oh, Lord. Okay, so that's the first scene. I wrote that scene so long ago, and it's barely changed, and it still just gets me every time. So I hope that you all enjoyed the first scene where we get to meet Ryan. And now we get to meet Shane. Shane Olson glanced up from the sheet of directions, forcing his gaze back to the road just in time to see the mountain goat in the middle of the highway. He yanked the steering wheel to the left, and the tires screamed. The shoddy car skirted across the double yellow line and came to rest in the slush, less than 12 inches from the mountain's unforgiving rock face. Shane gathered his lost breath. He shifted into reverse, and the wheels spun over the mud and melting snow. Why had he chosen the sensible, fuel-efficient sedan at the dealership the week prior? Not that he'd had many options. 5,000 couldn't do much on a car lot these days. No wonder he hadn't seen another car like this for 100 miles. The sedan had gasped for breath on every incline of the snow-slicked mountainous highway and slithered like a snake on the declines. And now this. He'd be late and miss his only chance. Shane shifted the car into drive and pressed the gas pedal, but the car refused to move. He shouldn't have stopped to sleep at the rest area in South Dakota. An early start could have assured him that he'd make it to West Yellowstone, Montana by 9 in the morning. Yet no matter how hard he pressed the gas pedal, the sunlight caught up to him. At least until he ducked behind the mountains, like a sinner hiding from God. Ah, that sounded like a sermon from his prior life. Of course, he hadn't written any sermons since last September 4th, the day he lost everything. He reversed again, and the car finally broke loose from the mud. And from the rearview mirror, the mountain goat watched him ease back onto the road. Strange world. 5 minutes later, he double-checked the printed directions, without nearly crashing this time, and turned onto a wet gravel road marked by a crooked metal mailbox, and almost swallowed by a field of wildflowers. A decrepit wood sign towered overhead, and with some imagination he could connect the chips of red paint sprinkled across the wood to read River's Edge Resort. Shane drove between the tall pines, gravel crackling beneath the car's wheels. The first building came into view. It was small but wide, with sun-faded paneling that had once been red, topped with a tin roof dusted by last night's snow. Shane steered the car near the front door, pulling it to a stop near a dirty ice chest. A large cardboard sign rested inside a window. The words office, restaurant, fly shop were written in clean and precise script, with a hint of femininity that looked out of place among the cobwebs. With a turn of the key, he cut the radio. Early in the drive, he'd found a Christian station, but the songs couldn't have sounded more foreign if they'd been played in Swedish. He changed it to a series of country stations, each one beginning and ending with static every 100 miles or so. He never liked the twang or style, but it added noise to the cross-country trek that had thankfully just come to an end. Now only the bugs on the windshield kept him company. Even they seemed confused by the late spring snow. A heaviness filled his chest, pulling down his shoulders and chin. He had the mind to pray, but no, it was 9:07, and he had no time for self-pity. He pushed open the car door. It squeaked loudly as he leaned on it while unfolding his tall frame from the cramped driver's seat. He stretched his arms over his head and sucked in a lungful of Montana air. The sun crested the eastern mountains, and a warm golden hue began to wash across the scenery, replacing the blue of morning. Down the stretch of gravel road leading away from his car, cabins ranged in size, all matching the restaurant with their red wood and tin and sheltered by the tall pines. Behind him, the gravel road disappeared behind trees, civilization fading into the wilderness, and the seclusion he desperately craved. He rapped on the office, restaurant, fly shop door, stopping after 2 knocks for fear that another would crack the rattling window pane. He waited another minute before raising his hand to the glass and peering in. A loud, sudden curse rang out, and a flock of birds erupted from the tin roof. Shane turned. No one. Another curse word cut through the peaceful air. He'd had to get used to foul language this past year, but these words were not threatening or angry. Instead, they were pained. He walked along the side of the restaurant toward the growing sound of rushing water. Beyond the covered porch, the scenery opened into a living, breathing mural. Mountains rose into the sky. The river water glistened with the morning sunlight as it rushed between rock-strewn banks filled with snow. Patched with snow. A faint yellow hog. Yeah. Wouldn't that be fun? Just a random pig just showed up. It was yellow. It'd be a little disturbing. Let me try that again. I am terrible at reading aloud. This is like my fear, to read aloud to you guys. So just bear with me. A faint yellow hog. Oh my gosh. It's great. Wouldn't that be great? It could be on the cover too. Just a little pig right there. Yeah, it'd be great. A faint yellow fog hovered above the water, slowly creeping downriver. No, not fog. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of tiny insects bobbed up and down in a dance, and sitting on a picnic table 10 yards away was a woman. She faced away from him toward the river. A veil of wild curls, brick red with streaks of gold, grazed the middle of her back. The woman was so still, and her color so warm, that Shane had first mistaken her for one more element of the picturesque landscape. Another swear word, but this time it was spoken in quiet desperation, almost a prayer of sorts. Fingertips reached around her shoulder, kneading it gently. Her head fell in defeat to some unknown force. Shane's heart lurched for the stranger in front of him, yet he remained frozen in the shadow of the porch. He was no longer a pastor. It was not his job to care for the flock. Not anymore. The woman sighed and raised her chin to the emerging sun. She lifted her hair off of her neck and wound it into a bun on the crown of her head. Her left arm froze, and a small cry escaped her. Gingerly, she secured her bun and then carefully removed her flannel shirt to reveal a white tank top and strong arms. She stood, then gripped the end of the picnic table and lifted, balancing most of the weight on her right arm. With a small grunt, she dragged the table across the ground, leaving footprints and lines in the quickly melting snow. "Let me help you with that," Shane called. Her head whipped toward him as he jogged over. Her face was flushed, and sweat dripped down the side of her neck, but she didn't put the table on the ground. "I've got it." "No, really, let me do that for you." Shane moved closer. She lowered the table, but gave no ground as she turned square to face him. She placed her hands on her hips and cocked her head, studying him. "Who are you?" "Shane Olson, the new cook." He focused on her eyes as they burned into his and retreated a step. "I was supposed to meet with Chuck Matthews at 9, but no one answered the door." "You'll find that time is flexible here. My father's around somewhere." Her confidence was ablaze as she took a complete inventory from his head to his shoes and back. "The new cook, huh? You're certainly better to look at than a meal. Maybe we won't need to keep you shut up in the kitchen all summer. The female guests will like you." "Thanks, I guess." He hoped the heat in his pale face was not noticeable in this light. She, however, was unfazed. She closed the distance between them until she was less than a foot away. It was the closest he'd been to a woman in a long time, and he rocked back on his heels. Her eyes finally left his, but only to study his mouth, his nose, and his hair. They narrowed, and her rosy lips lifted into a smirk. "I'm messing with you. You're my cousin's friend, the pastor. From Iowa?" "I'm not a pastor anymore, and I'm from Ohio." He summoned his remaining confidence and steeled himself, imploring his feet to stay planted, even as she leaned towards him. "Same difference." Shane's eyes dropped to her bare left shoulder. A ribbon of scar tissue, still red from her massaging fingers, trailed out from the strap of her tank top. He stepped around her. "Actually, it's a whole nother state." "But is it really?" She swiveled to face him once again. "I'm Ryan. Did Sage tell you about me?" "She did. I thought you were a man." "Oh, right, because Ryan is a boy's name. I've never heard that before. If you haven't noticed, I'm a girl. It's a whole nother gender." "Are you teasing me for how I talk now?" Nah, I've just always thought it was a funny phrase you Midwesterners say. I hear it a lot from our guests. They stared at each other for a long moment. How much had Sage shared with her cousin? Probably not very much. Ryan didn't seem to see him as the monster he'd become. Shane offered his hand. It's nice to meet you. Ditto. She took his hand, gripping it assertively at first, then softening. He recoiled, breaking the handshake. So where are we taking this? Shane grabbed the edge of the table and lifted. Behind cabin 4, over there. She joined him in pulling it along the ground. And when her arm grazed his, he readjusted his grip farther from her. Wouldn't it be easier to carry this table? Less resistance? Probably, but I can't support much weight with my left arm. Old injury never healed right. Beneath the surgical scar, her skin was smooth and fair, dotted with small freckles. A series of more jagged scars, shining silver in the sunlight, laced her forearm. No, forearms. Evidence of a story waiting to be told, and one Shane was determined never to get close enough to hear. Eyes up, Pastor. Shane dropped his eyes to the table, his cheeks growing hot at her assumption. No, I wasn't. I was noticing your scars. Noticing your scars? Smooth. Real smooth. Sure you were. She sounded pleased. From her fiery red hair down to her slim-fitting blue jeans, she must cause a stir wherever she went. Like Chloe, his beloved Chloe. Shane focused on the ground under his feet. Shouldn't they have reached cabin 4 by now? She nudged his side. Lighten up, Shane. I was kidding. Don't they have sarcasm in Iowa? They positioned the picnic table on a pad of snow-covered grass between cabin 4 and the water's edge. The river meandered through the valley to the witness of white-tipped pines, blue sky, and not much else. Hey, you okay? With a flick of her wrist, Ryan brushed Shane's cheek. He seized her hand, perhaps a bit too tight considering how her breath hitched. I'm married. Inwardly, he cringed. Whether it was out of habit, denial, or embarrassment, he could now add lying to his list of sins. Her expression hardened. Good, because I'm not interested. It was a mosquito. Apparently they can smell your Midwestern blood from miles away, too. She yanked her hand free. Where is this wife of yours, anyway? These personal questions were almost enough to make him catch the next flight to a non-English-speaking country. He should have said no to the car and bought a $5,000 plane ticket instead, one way. Ryan's gaze didn't relent. Well, if she needed an answer so badly, anyone would do. Still back in Ohio. She's more farmhouse chic than rustic. She wouldn't like Montana. Ryan scoffed. She stepped toward the river, which had swollen beyond its bed, and grabbed hold of the grass on the bank. She kneeled and sank her arm beneath the surface up to her elbow. With her other hand, she scooped some water and poured it onto her scarred shoulder a few times. Shane followed her lead and spread his fingers above the colorful pebbles in the riverbed. The icy water, likely from the melting snow, stung his skin. Not wanting to look like a wimp in front of Ryan, he refused to shirk away from the cold. He rubbed away the table's offering of winter dirt from his hands until his nerves screamed. Standing, he dried his hands on his jeans. Ryan shook the excess water off as she reclaimed her statuesque form. Her gaze followed the land from its mountain top down to the boulders on the opposite bank, a proud grin fixed on her face. She drew in a deep breath and lifted her chin heavenward. He could see her as a child in this place, fording the river to get a basket full of berries, perhaps sunning herself as a teenager on the rocky bank, sitting by the fire pit under the arm of a boy who didn't deserve her. Well, if she wouldn't like all this, she'd really hate me. I'm about as Montana as they come. Standing there, she almost eclipsed the surrounding majesty. Shane forced himself to look away, back toward his car. He had the urge to keep running until he found a place where he could be alone, far away from meddling redheads who stood too close and smelled too sweet. I hope you can learn to appreciate a little pocket of the world. There's nowhere I'd rather be than here on this river. Her gaze drifted away from him. Who knows? Maybe by the end of the summer you'll be a regular Norman Maclean. Who? Norman Maclean, author of A River Runs Through It and Other Stories. Have you read it? I think I saw the movie a while back when I was a kid. Does that count? It certainly does not. You can't live in Montana without reading that book. It's a rule. Is it? He asked. Well, it's my rule. She dug her hands into her back pockets and rocked her hip to the side. His words were carried away by the current, leaving only the rushing water and a distant bird song to fill the moments his eyes lingered on her. which must have been too many considering how she laughed at him, a soft, teasing laugh that shook his resolve more than he cared to admit. Keep your head down. Stay out of sight. He clapped his hands together in front of him and glanced toward the office. Is that all you need me for? I should check if your father's ready for me. Ryan smiled coolly. Oh no, we have 10 more to move. So that is the first chapter of Wildflower Road. I hope you enjoyed it and want to read more. If you do, I'll include the link at the bottom or in the comments so you guys could pre-order it if you want. It'll get here just in time. It should get here on release day, so that would be great. Thank you guys so much for joining and listening to me. It obviously is a lot longer than my typical Love, Wonder, Read Wednesday, but I thought you'd appreciate a little sneak peek of what we have ahead of us. So I hope you appreciated Ryan and Shane's story. In the comments, I would love to know what you hope will happen for Ryan and Shane in this story. Some of you have read This Wandering Heart, and so you've gotten a feel for Ryan and who she is and what she's all about, and maybe even a little bit about what her history is. And then if you've read Mistletoe Menagerie, my free novella, which is available on my website, you got to meet Shane. He was the pastor who helped Luke and Sage pull off their Christmas morning breakfast for the children. And you got to meet him then before his life fell apart. And so let me know in the comments what you hope to see will happen in the book. So thank you guys so much. And I hope to hear more from you all in the comments and on Facebook. I'm going to be playing a lot of games. I'm going to be posting another Spot the Difference game today. So for those of you who appreciated seeing a little Mr. Darcy rising out of the river, maybe you'll appreciate the ones that I have coming up. So that's all I have today. Hope you guys have a great rest of the day. And if my mom is watching, happy birthday, Mom. I'm glad we got to have brunch together. And yeah, I will talk to you all later. Bye.